This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. The massive California wildfire known as the Camp Fire has killed at least 48 people and scorched 210 square miles. Firefighters say cooler weather and fading winds are helping to slow down the blaze. Thousands have been battling the blazes that are now the deadliest and costliest in the state's history. Hundreds of people are unaccounted for, and many are desperately searching for loved ones. Friends and relatives have been calling hospitals, shelters, even the coroner's office.
I think that there's hope, but also we have to prepare ourselves for the worst.
The Sheriff's Department could release a list of the missing soon, and 100 National Guard troops will help teams already looking for them. Mark Martin spoke with Billy Graham of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association about its ministry to the fire victims.
Talk about why we always see churches and Christian organizations on the front lines of helping at times like this.
Well, I think as Christians, we should be the first ones to be responding because we represent the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and we should be the first ones responding to anybody in need, whether they're homeless or, in this case, we've seen a couple tragedies there, one with the fire and one with the shooting. And I think it's very important as Christians that we need to respond and help people in times of need and pray with them, help with physical needs as well. And there's going to be a lot of physical needs going forward.
What is the most important thing beyond meeting the physical needs of the victims?
Well, there are a lot of physical needs. People are going to need homes and shelters, but one of the greatest things you can do, and that's one thing I'm so excited about the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, we send chaplains simply just to sit there and pray with people, cry with people, hold people. I mean, it's just, people have lost everything. They're devastated, and they don't even know where the next step begins. And we just sit there and we just start praying and praying for these individuals. We'll see some people come to know Christ, but I don't think we've ever been there when someone said, no, don't pray for me. People in times like this, they say, I'll do anything I can. I need help any way I can. So they'll say, pray for me. And so we pray with people and just build relationships with them. And hopefully we get to tell them about Christ and lead them to Christ through this great tragedy. But we're just there to help. And we got Samaritan's Purse going out there to help too. And we're grateful for Samaritan's Purse's leadership in a disaster recovery like this. But there's going to be a lot of heartaches. And I know a lot of people have died. Most people died in this fire than any other fire in U.S. history. It's a very sad time. And this is a lot of time that, you can't replace humans. So here we just have to simply pray and pray that God would minister to them in their time of grief.
Amen. We know that the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association's rapid response team is in Northern California to minister to the victims of the Camp Fire. You talked a little bit about that. Can you tell us more about this part of the ministry and what they do in times of natural disaster and tragedy?
Yeah, this was actually born out of 9/11. When my father, Franklin Graham, went up to New York City, people were just standing around like the whole country. I think if we all remember, we all felt like we'd been punched in the gut, and we were just in awe of what had happened. And so my dad said, there's just people out there that needed prayer. So Dad sent just a whole bunch of men and women of our staff, really untrained, just to sit in a building and pray with people. And the line went around the block for people waiting just to have prayer. And so that's where our ministry started. And so we'll respond to natural disasters like forest fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding. But we also respond to man-made disasters like this shooting, this latest one in California. We've seen unfortunately, a lot of school shootings and shootings at workplaces. We respond to that, and we just simply pray with people. We're usually some of the very first people. And it's interesting that, especially when we get to these man-made disasters, like in San Bernardino a couple years ago, we were able to, when we were one of the first ones to respond, to show up there, our chaplains were, and the police saw us and they said, come back here right now, we need help. And they asked us to come on back behind the taped areas and pray with family members. It was a tough situation, and most officers aren't trained that way. And so they allowed us just to sit there and pray with people and talk with people. And we hate showing up at disasters. This is not a fun thing, but we know that in the world that we live in, we're going to have disasters. And so we want to prepare to tell people about Jesus and just to minister to people at the same time.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Yeah, thank you so much. God bless.
You too.
Our thanks to Will Graham there. There are reports President Donald Trump plans to shake up his administration in the coming days. At the top of the list is Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. The president reportedly wants someone more aggressive at implementing stricter immigration policies at the border. The problem is Nielsen is close to the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and some speculate he might be on his way out as well. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke might also be leaving. More than a dozen news organizations are supporting CNN in its lawsuit against the White House. This comes after the Trump administration revoked reporter Jim Acosta's press credentials. The ban came after a heated exchange with President Trump during a news conference. CNN calls the move a violation of the First Amendment. In his own statement on the matter, the president said there is no First Amendment right to enter the White House. A number of ministries are focused on encouraging and helping Christians to run for public office. One that's been at it for decades now finds itself at the center of what some say is a battle for America's soul. Here's CBN's senior Washington correspondent, Jennifer Wishon.
The D. James Kennedy Center for Christian Statesmanship has one goal: to equip Christian leaders for battle in the public arena.
We train them in the U.S. Constitution, in biblical worldview, political philosophy, and then we have classes on public speaking, how to do media interviews, how to handle ambush interviews, all the things that they're going to face out there on the campaign trail.
Ray Gonzalez completed the program and just ran for Congress in Texas.
I believe that one of the things that has driven a lot of folks to the polls is seeing just how far our country has veered from biblical principles. So to fix that, the only thing left for voters to do is to go to the polls. But the one thing that those of us who have been called to serve can do is to actually run for office.
Each year, the center awards a leader who lives life in a way that honors God. And Tuesday, that distinction went to Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe for making his life count for Christ. Oklahoma's junior Senator James Langford previously received the award.
It's very interesting for me to be able to hear some people say, well, if you come from a biblical worldview, then really that's a ministry or that's private life that doesn't really spill over into your public life. That's not only contrary to who we are as Americans, that's contrary to what we believe even as Christians. 36 of the 39 books of the Old Testament were written to, by, or about a political leader. A third of the New Testament was written to a political leader. Saul's mission when he became Paul was to go to the Jews, the Gentiles, and the Gentile kings. This political engagement and this ministry to people in politics, as well as engaging in what as our culture should be a part of who we are.
Having people with a biblical worldview, people who know how to articulate what the scriptures say and to be able to present that to others and to be able to defend their positions in that way, we need more of that in this country.
And the center is accepting Christian students to begin classes in January, February, and March of 2019. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Israel's defense minister resigned today over a ceasefire agreement yesterday after Hamas unleashed the worst attack on Israel in years. But the political fallout from the ceasefire could be huge for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In his resignation, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman called the ceasefire a surrender to terror. The move could lead to the collapse of Netanyahu's government and force early elections. Hamas and other terror groups launched some 460 rockets at Israel over a 24-hour period. Israel responded with some 150 airstrikes on military targets in Gaza. Addressing the UN, Israel's Representative Danny Danon played the red alert sign that Israelis hear. Israelis and Gazans had different reactions to the ceasefire. Gazans mounted a huge victory rally in the streets, but Israelis in the area were furious, saying they're being treated like second-class citizens. Earlier today, I spoke with CBN News' Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell about these developments. He's in Jerusalem. How could the resignation of Israel's defense minister lead to early elections? And could those elections throw Benjamin Netanyahu out of office?
Well, Ephraim, that certainly is a potential, and it's really been quite a roller coaster here in the last 24, 48 hours. We went from the brink of war now to the possible collapse of the Benjamin Netanyahu government. It's really a question of math, Ephraim. Right now, Netanyahu's government has 66 seats. Lieberman, coming out of the government, takes his 5 seats. That goes down to 61 seats out of the 120-seat Knesset. So he really has the slimmest of margins. Netanyahu has been threatening, actually, that he could go to new elections. He can call elections if he will. And right now, previous to the conflict with Hamas in the last few days, polls look very good for him, but I don't know what's going to happen after this latest ceasefire. Lieberman's contention is really a microcosm of really the debate within Israel right now, whether or not it was a surrender to terrorism by having this ceasefire.
So why do you think there was a ceasefire, Chris, instead of war?
Well, I think the calculations, it was a military calculations. I think the heads of the IDF, the Shin Bet, the Mossad was saying, don't go to war right now. It's too messy. I think the main question about Gaza, Ephraim, is what happens if you go in militarily, if you defeat Hamas? Who's going to rule Hamas after that? Certainly Israel doesn't want to do that. Egypt doesn't want to do that. The Palestinian Authority doesn't want to do that. So really, that's the main question with Gaza. So sometimes the calculation is let's live with a ceasefire temporarily and just manage the situation and try to actually take over Gaza militarily.
We know you've been following this attack throughout the last few days. Can you tell us what it was like to be there in that apartment that took a direct hit?
Yeah, we were there. We had a story on that yesterday, and we were there in the very kitchen where they took a direct hit, and it really does make it personal. When you see kitchen cupboards filled with cookies, when you see a kitchen table that was destroyed, knowing that 24 hours before that, somebody was sitting there, and actually, tragically, they lost their lives. 2 women were seriously injured. When we were there, the neighbor next door was collecting her belongings, and we found out all the toys of her children were destroyed in that attack. If you look through the whole building, almost the whole building is uninhabitable right now because the concussion really destroyed many of the things in that building. So really took it to a personal level. When you hear somebody died, but when you see actually that site, we actually saw blood on the floor as well. It makes it much more personal.
Indeed. Tell us what it's like for Israelis living close to the border. Why do they call themselves second-class citizens?
Well, I'll give you an example, Ephraim. When we were down there for several hours, and we realized at any time there could be a rocket attack. We drove without our seatbelts, because we knew that if we had to stop, we had to get out quickly, lay beside the car. Imagine doing that for 15 years. That's what some of these people in the south of Israel have been living with. And that's why they call themselves second-class citizens, because they don't believe that the government right now is taking care of them and giving them the security they feel they deserve. And it goes back to that political calculation of Netanyahu. You know, does he go in militarily, take over Gaza? Right now, his calculation is no. But certainly that leaves these citizens in southern Israel, more than 1 million under the threat of rocket attack at any time.
All right, Chris Mitchell, thank you so much for that report from Jerusalem. Stay safe. We appreciate you following this story for us.
Thanks, Ephraim.
Coming up, we're talking with a former Planned Parenthood manager who's joined a pro-life group about what she saw and what changed her mind about abortion. Sue Thayer worked for 17 years in the abortion industry. She worked for Planned Parenthood and was a manager for one of its clinics. She joins us now with more on what caused her change of heart and why she's now working for a pro-life organization. Sue, first of all, tell us what you learned about the abortion industry in the 17 years that you were a part of it.
Well, in the first years that I worked there, you know, I felt like we were doing some good stuff, you know, pap smears and breast exams and so forth. But over the years I worked there, Planned Parenthood kind of went one direction and I went another. I got in a church where I was really being fed the true word of God and came to see what I was doing, what my part in the abortion industry was, as being totally wrong. And eventually they started doing a new procedure called webcam abortion, which is done by non-medical people like myself and my staff. And it's a new and horrible way of doing medication or chemical abortions. And we were going to be doing those at my center. And I knew that was a bad idea and was pretty vocal about that. So I did ultimately end up getting fired, which was actually kind of a relief. But that's how I started there, was really thinking that I was helping women.
And what has you now working for pro-life and working for 40 Days for Life?
God just did such an amazing work in my life and in my heart over the last couple years that I was there, and then since I've been out. And I just really felt convicted by the Lord to speak up about webcam abortion, what it is, where it's happening. I felt like if I didn't speak up, no one was going to ever really know about it. So that's how I ended up ultimately sharing a little bit with some friends here in my local town about what a webcam abortion is. We were talking about how horrible it was. They were stunned that it was happening here in Storm Lake, Iowa. And they said, what can we do? And I said, well, I don't know much about it, but there's this thing called 40 Days for Life. It was fairly new at that time. And I said, I know Planned Parenthood hates it. So let me look it up and I'll see, what I can find out about it. So when I came home and looked online, it was about the last day, I think, to sign up for the fall campaign that year. And so without much thought to it, I went ahead and signed our town up to do this huge thing, which we'd never done anything like that in Storm Lake before, and ended up, by God's good grace, being able to fill 40 days of 12 hours a day prayer in front of the abortion facility where I used to work. And within a couple months after that, Planned Parenthood made the announcement that it was closing. And I was just stunned that they would close, because while I was there, they made lots of money. They had lots of clients. We had lots of hours. And in my last few months there, I signed a 15-year lease. So I knew that the clinic would be there at least through 2022. So when they closed in 2012, I was very surprised, even though that's what we had prayed for.
Yeah. Before we let you go, we're just about out of time. How will you help those wanting to leave the abortion industry?
Well, when 40 Days for Life is outside on the sidewalk and the workers inside see them out there praying in the rain and the sleet and the snow, no matter what, it really does make a difference in how they look at what they're doing. It causes them to take a second look. So when they come out and talk to someone, oftentimes the people that are on the sidewalk praying have no idea what to do or what to say. So they'll just simply give them my number, and then hopefully I can help connect them with other ministries or, other ways to get out of there.
All right, Sue Thayer, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, we're going to find out how states rank in helping victims of child sex trafficking. Stay with us. For years, child trafficking victims have suffered under state laws that penalize them and kept their traffickers and buyers safe. But anti-trafficking movement is changing that. This year's report card from Shared Hope International is out today, and it gives A's and B's to 35 states. Shared Hope President Linda Smith joins us now with more on the progress being made. So, Linda, I understand bipartisanship is actually behind a lot of these top grades this year, showing that at least on the state level, lawmakers are able to cross the aisle to protect trafficking victims. Why do you think lawmakers have been able to come together on this issue?
Because I think the real bottom line to all of this is most people care deeply about what we're talking about. We're talking about children. We're not talking about an issue. We're not talking about trends or adults making choices. We're talking about our kids. So most people are right there, and the lawmakers are also getting some pressure. So if it wasn't their issue, we have built a national advocacy campaign that we facilitate material and help to advocates and legislators all over the nation and all the states to help them both inform and encourage other members of their House and Senate to get in line, and many governors and attorney generals, and back this issue.
These states that are getting A and B grades, how are they actually making their states safe places for victims?
Well, I think the top one is when I started this, when I did the first analysis back to decide how we would frame this issue and frame the law, I found that most states were actually arresting the kids, but there were not penalties for buyers. If anything, there was a prostitution penalty of maybe $500 and a misdemeanor. And now all states make it very clear that if you go to your ATM, you pull money out, and you decide to go buy a child for sex, there's a serious penalty now for you. And I think that that deterrent adds to that the traffickers, the people that facilitate what the buyer purchases, are now up there higher on the level of prosecutions also. I think the other thing that's really important when we think about safety for children, we have labeled our children prostitutes, and that man bringing money from the ATM to buy them, just a John, for decades. So now that we're making a change to that, we understand that a trafficked child has been traumatized. She or he has been sold over and over again. That putting them in jail for the mandatory 72 hours as a criminal under a criminal statute does two things. It rapes them again. They're cavity searched. They're put in clothes that are not so attractive. They're handcuffed, and they're put behind bars with other criminals. So they're violated again by the very system that's supposed to take care of them. So now 25 states have made a change to that, and they've changed it. They've passed a non-crim law. I guess the interesting thing about that, with 50 states and D.C. passing a law on buyers, which was hard, we've only got half the way on not putting the kids in jail, which I think undermines the whole issue, because we're still calling those kids criminals and somebody that's bad. So I think the issue there that is real important is some of the A and B states. Of them, 4 states, including my own state of Washington, still criminalizes the child.
It's sad. Linda, we are out of time, but we thank you so much for your work, and we applaud the work you're doing. We hope that other states will make the grade as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead, the latest on the documentary Restoring Tomorrow has hit theaters. We've got a look back at what it tells. Stay with us. Restoring Tomorrow was in theaters last night across parts of the nation. It is a documentary by actor and director Aaron Wolf, who went on a journey of rediscovering his faith. It already received praise by critics at film festivals for its universal story of hope and renewal in this generation as they reconnect with their faith, their community, and their past. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, the news continues 24/7 at cbnnews.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.